Welcome to the Scottish Rite Journal podcast, an audio excerpt of the Scottish Rite Journal, published by the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. This week's article, A Night Out with Robert Burns, written by Hannah Ramsey, House of the Temple Museum intern, can be found on page 18 of the September-October 2018 issue of the Scottish Rite Journal. Robert Burns became a Freemason in 1781 and soon rose to become Deputy Master of St. James Lodge in Tarbolton. 7 years later, he was inaugurated as Poet Laureate of the Freemasons in the Canongate Kilwinning Lodge No. 2 in Edinburgh. One can see a depiction of this scene through the 1846 painting by William Stewart Watson, the inauguration of Robert Burns as Poet Laureate of the Lodge. Burns lived a short life, died at the age of 37, July 21, 1796, in Dumfries, Scotland, of a possible rheumatic heart condition. The funeral took place the following Monday, and he was buried in the far corner of St. Michael's Churchyard in Dumfries. A simple slab of stone was erected as his gravestone by his wife, Jean Armour. In September 1817, his body was moved to be interred in a grave people thought he deserved, the Burns Mausoleum. In that time, someone with the prestige of Burns would have had a death mask made at the time of his death, but since he was not in the best of means financially, and could only afford a common grave, it was not done. Since Robert Burns was buried before any death mask could have been made, experts had to rely on a cast of his skull that was taken after his death. On March 31, 1834, almost 40 years after Robert Burns's death, his skull was taken from his crypt by a group from Dumfries with an interest in examining it. The leader of the group, John McDiarmid, and his followers were advocates for phrenology. Phrenology is now a discredited pseudoscience that believes one could read deep truths about someone's personality from plotting the bumps on their head. Phrenologists believed the brain was made up of 27 individual organs that determined personality, and these could be measured by studying the shape of the skull. Dr. Megan Coyer of the University of Glasgow says that the phrenologists were interested in Burns because he was such an important character in the public's imagination, and therefore they wanted to see if the bumps on his skull would match up to his public persona. His widow, Jean Armour, however, was not keen on allowing these scientists to disturb her husband's body after it had been removed once already into the Burns Mausoleum. It was not until Jean Armour died in 1834 that another opportunity arose to get a plaster of Paris cast of the skull. McDiarmid realized the crypt was going to be opened, and he appears to have obtained permission from Jean's brother to take a cast of the skull. Historian Louise Yeoman says, "They don't want to be seen, and they don't want a mob to assemble and say, 'Here they are, violating the poet's grave. We are going to stop them.' They make their first attempt at 7 p.m., but there are too many people about. At 10 p.m., in come our boys again, over the wall, sneak up to the mausoleum with the keys. They go down into the vault with a ladder and a muffled lantern so people don't see the light." Well, according to Burns experts who have reconstructed the process, McDiarmid had thought he would be able to take a plaster cast of the skull in the vault, but realized he could not. So he put it into a linen bag and walked it up the High Street to Queensbury Street, where the plasterer, James Fraser, worked. Dr. Coyer adds, "There are several persons involved, one of which is the surgeon, Archibald Blacklock. He apparently tries his hat on the skull. Because the skull is so large, he wanted to know if his hat fit or not. The freshly cast skull was rushed to Edinburgh to George Combe, the master of phrenology. George Combe was a Scottish lawyer and the leader and spokesman of the phrenological movement for more than 20 years. In 1820, Combe helped to found the Phrenological Society of Edinburgh, which in 1823 began to publish a phrenological journal. Through his lectures and writings, Combe attracted public attention to phrenology on continental Europe and in the United States, as well as his native United Kingdom. Combe's most popular work, The Constitution of Man, was published in 1828, and he was widely denounced as a materialist and atheist. In 1858, he died and is buried in Dean Cemetery, Edinburgh. A death mask was taken when he died, and it is now on display in the Edinburgh Anatomy Museum. Combe's report rated Burns for a number of character traits based on the size of the organs. Along with a high score for benevolence, the phrenologist said this explained his love for weak and helpless creatures, displayed in poems such as To a Mouse and On Seeing a Wounded Hare. Dr. Coyer noted that a lot of it is just talking about poetry and life and trying to make sense of the scientific analysis in relation to Burns, well-known public character, and his written work. This was a risky strategy, she says, because Burns was so well known that if their findings had been at odds with his public persona, it would have made phrenology look like a fraud. One can find a bronze copy of the original plaster cast and an original copy of George Combe's report on display in the Robert Burns Library of the Supreme Council. The House of the Temple houses one of the largest collections of Robert Burns' works in the world, with the largest being in Scotland. The collection was compiled and donated by William Smith, 32nd degree, the former director of the United States Botanical Gardens. In addition to works by Brother Robert Burns, the library contains works about him and Scotland, as well as chapbooks, some of which contain Burns' poems and others which reflect the times during which he lived. He is also celebrated all around the world on January 25th with Burns Night celebrations. They highlight some of the poetry, especially when the night ends with the singing of Auld Lang Syne. If one wants to use the library for research, all one has to do is make an appointment. Don't forget, you can read the Scottish Rite Journal anytime by downloading the Scottish Rite Journal app, free now in your app store. The Scottish Rite Journal is published by the Supreme Council, Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction. Illustrious S. Brent Morris, 33rd degree, Editor-in-Chief. Copyright 2018, all rights reserved. All citations for this article can be found in the corresponding print edition of the Scottish Rite Journal. I'm your host, Bob Chase, 33rd degree. Thanks for listening.